Simon Goodman has spent 20 years searching for his family's art collection looted by the Nazis in World War II. Much of the art, taken from Jewish families, was intended to stock Adolf Hitler's planned museum in Linz, Austria. Goodman's grandfather, Fritz, was a wealthy Dutch banker who amassed a great art collection with his wife, Louise.
He had at least 60 old masters, some of them very important, some impressionists.
After the Nazis occupied the Netherlands, Hitler's art agents forced Fritz and Louise to sell, telling them if they did, they would survive.
They take everything, starting with the old masters all the way down to the china teacups. The trick was that they would be given a train ticket to Italy, and that train ticket ended up taking them to a concentration camp instead.
Goodman's grandparents were killed in the camps. His father, Bernard, living in England, survived the war, got married, and had Simon and his brother Nick. Bernard traveled frequently to look for the missing art. Some resurfaced in the Netherlands, but it was a fight to get it back.
The Dutch government didn't consider a forced sale to be any kind of extenuating circumstances. They said it's still a sale, you complied, you signed this contract.
After Bernard died in 1994, boxes of his papers arrived at Simon's doorstep in Los Angeles. As Simon recounts in his new memoir, The Orpheus Clock, a reference to a piece that he eventually recovered, his father's quest became his own.
One of the most important pieces of evidence that was in your father's papers was an envelope with 3 black and white slides.
Yes.
What did that show?
I held them up to the light. They were obviously French Impressionist paintings. So we had them blown up and then we started asking around. I mean, one I could clearly see was by Edgar Degas.
This 1890 Degas landscape was a painting his grandparents were forced to sell. Simon first saw a color image of it in a book at UCLA Library in 1995.
Really, my life changes at that point.
The collector who had purchased the Degas had donated it to the Art Institute of Chicago. Simon and his brother sued, and in 1998 were named the rightful owners. They agreed to split the value of the painting with the collector, and the museum bought out their half. The successful claim was the first case of its kind in the U.S., and many more have followed. For them, and for other families, in other museums, and in other countries.
It's like a forensic job. You're trying to piece together the ownership history of paintings.
Lucien Simmons' job is to check artworks offered to Sotheby's auction house and weed out any with a tainted past by checking documents, physically examining the art, and checking databases of missing works.
That process is designed to ascertain whether or not the painting could have been in, if you like, the wrong place at the wrong time. Could have been in continental Europe between 1933 and 1945 and could have been stolen. Once in a blue moon, we find a picture which was with a bad person, somebody who's a red flag.
So I guess the easy ones to reject are the ones that have been reported stolen in the Art Loss Register and similar databases.
We wouldn't reject them. What we do is to say to our consignor or our client, look, we have a problem here. Let's now sit down together and try and work out if we can bring about a resolution.
I imagine the reaction is, you've got to be kidding me. I paid good money for this. I did nothing wrong. I have a legal bill of sale. Is that typical?
It's a typical reaction, or people say, I never knew. I inherited this from my grandmother. It's a shock, but my job is to actually talk people off the ledge and then try and make it in from a bad story into a good story.
Simmons and Sotheby's were able to turn a bad story into a good story by selling this Paris street scene by French Impressionist Camille Pissarro. The painting had belonged to a German-Jewish businessman killed in the Holocaust. When the painting resurfaced in the Israel Museum 60 years later, the family made a claim. The museum returned it to the family, who took it to Sotheby's, who sold it for $31 million in 2014. Museums are often caught in the middle.
Before we buy a work of art, we do as much research as we can.
Eric Lee is director of the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas. After a flurry of looted art claims, 15 years ago, American museums adopted guidelines telling them how to handle Nazi looted art.
It's an ongoing process, but there are always gaps. And rarely do you have a history of complete ownership of a work of art from the time it was created until today.
The Kimball decided to review everything and be transparent, posting online the ownership histories called the provenance. Sometimes this process meant reckoning with uncomfortable truths. This canvas by 19th century British painter Joseph Turner hung in the museum for 40 years. In 2006, a family came forward with proof the painting was looted from them. The Kimball returned it and then repurchased it at auction for $6 million, a big price for doing the right thing. And then it happened again.
It's a sculpture of extremely high quality of a very beautiful woman from the Italian Renaissance.
In 2011, Lee was shown this photograph of the sculpture in the hands of a special Allied Army unit dedicated to post-war art recovery, the Monuments Men, who found it stashed with Nazi loot in an Austrian salt mine.
I was completely floored by this. We had no idea that the sculpture had been taken by the Nazis.
Because the sculpture was returned after the war to the rightful owners before being resold, the Kimball got to keep it. The latest looted art case to be settled in the U.S. involved the University of Oklahoma.
It hit me right between the eyes the minute I learned of this.
What University President David Boren learned about in 2012 was that there was a problem with the gift of 30 paintings bequeathed to the school by a prominent Oklahoma family 12 years earlier. Among them was this Pizarro painting of a shepherdess. After the war, it traveled from France to Switzerland, the Netherlands, and New York, where a gallery sold it to the Oklahoma family in 1956. Just 4 years ago, the heir of a Jewish couple whose collection was looted during the Nazi occupation of France said the Pizarro was hers. Then she sued the university in federal court to get it back.
So we were confronted with a very difficult situation. A very generous donor who in good faith gave us this art, and another family that clearly had this art stolen from them by the Nazis.
Last month, the university settled the case, ceding title or ownership to the French claimant and agreeing to share its public display, a few years in Paris, then a few years in Oklahoma, and back again.
It's an ethical and moral issue, not just a legal issue. We weren't about to try to compromise our ethics in order to continue to build collections.
Claudia Schaum's family never had a big collection, but her grandparents bought some paintings in New York in the 1920s and 30s. Decades later, her parents inherited them, including this small picture of a man and a wife weighing gold by a 17th century Dutch artist. It hung in the Manhattan apartment where Schaum grew up.
I remember exactly where it was, passed by every day.
When her father died in 2011, Schaum and her siblings tried to sell it along with other paintings he owned. Sotheby's auctioned 5 of them, but declined to sell the Dutch painting, which had been appraised at $400,000. The red flag? A Nazi officer named Menton once possessed it. Schaum was unable to prove it was never stolen.
Sotheby's just said full stop, out, we're not touching it, and their recommendation at the time was just have a family member hang it on their wall, because that's just all that's ever going to happen to this painting.
It's tainted.
Yeah, exactly.
In the past year, Schaum gave up. Today, it hangs in her brother's home. Ironically, the notoriety of being looted can add value to an artwork.
It's a rare picture, it's in beautiful condition.
Since Lucien Simmons started his job at Sotheby's 21 years ago, the auction house has cleared and sold $800 million of once looted art.
They used to say, don't mention this difficult history of a painting. People won't want to know that this belonged maybe to a Nazi or was stolen from a Jewish family. But now people have gone the other way, and they actually want to hear the story. They want to hear the background of the painting.
Next month, Sotheby's will auction this painting from 1660 by the Dutch artist Gabriel Metsu. It belonged to the Rothschild family in Vienna until the Nazis took it in 1938 and hung it in Hitler's residence in Munich. The Monuments Men found it after the war with the Nazi inventory number on the back.
Count's clerks in the museum marked this AR, this is Alphonse von Rothschild, 857.
A story that is part of the marketing of a painting estimated to be worth $6 to $8 million.
Provenance is certainly going to add to its rarity and add to its appeal.
Hitler's museum never got built, but tens of thousands of artworks stolen in his name are unaccounted for. Simon Goodman is still searching. He currently has a claim against the Boymans Museum in Rotterdam for these hand-painted Renaissance-era dishes. Only recently did Amsterdam's Rijksmuseum return his family's 500-year-old silver and gold pitcher and these 17th century Chinese vases.
Are you doing this for the money?
The money is important because it's my delayed inheritance, it's my family's heritage, these are our belongings, but my primary motivation is as long as these things are out there that belong to my family, and it's my duty to get them back, because otherwise, in a way, Hitler won.